Hey everyone, this is Dr. Dave Striegel, and welcome to the Athletes in Dentistry podcast, learning from sports to elevate your practice. What happens when an extraordinary triathlete steps into the world of dentistry? In this episode of Athletes in Dentistry, we're unraveling the incredible journey of Lisa Copeland, who seamlessly marries her passion for athletics with a thriving career in dental hygiene, education, and coaching. Lisa takes us on a journey from the swimming pools of her childhood to the grueling Ironman competitions that tested her mental grit and strategic foresight. She highlights how mental toughness and meticulous planning were her allies, not just in sports, but also in her flourishing career with Philips Sonicare. In an intriguing twist, Lisa shares how her entry into dental hygiene paved the way for a prominent career in corporate education. She passionately discusses the pivotal role of communication within dental teams, sharing her expert strategies for fostering effective interaction, both among team members and with patients. Lisa's philosophy of embracing opportunities shines through as she draws compelling parallels between athletic training and professional success. Let's listen in to my conversation with Lisa to learn how athletic discipline and career excellence can set you on the path to success in dentistry. Take a listen. I'm here today with the incomparable Lisa Copeland, who is a master of many things. She's a registered dental hygienist and was for many years, but then eventually transitioned into speaking and coaching. And I'll let her talk a little bit more about that, but I'm very excited to see you, Lisa, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited to be here.
The Athletes in Dentistry podcast concept is really to shine a light on the amazing people in dentistry who happen to have an athletic or sports background often that no one knows about. And over the years, in getting to know a lot of people in dentistry and working in dentistry, and then combined with my background in sports psychology, I'm always drawn to those who have an athletic background. Therefore, when I learn of someone who has pushed themselves in that way, I just know there are many lessons that can be gained from someone who has devoted themselves not just to dentistry, but also to sports in some capacity. So why don't we start our conversation today with just learning more about you and your history? Where did it all start for you?
I'm a true redhead. And if you know anything about that, a lot of energy. I never walked, I ran. I just dove into everything. And my parents were, God, what are we going to do with all this energy? So sports seemed like a good outlet, right? I loved to swim. My mom was actually on the swim team in high school. Okay. My dad was a pretty good swimmer, and we went to a country club every year. During the summer, we'd start Memorial Day and it would close on Labor Day. And the end of the season every year, they would have this swim race. And since I was like 3 years old, I kept saying, can I swim in it? Can I swim in it? Can I swim in it? And so finally, the youngest age group was 6 to 8 years old. And I was finally able to do it. I was turning 6. I wasn't quite 6. And they let me enter it. My parents were like, okay, we got to get her into this year.
Sakes, let her do this, please.
Right. So I'm the tiniest little thing because I was pretty tiny when I was younger. And they put me next to the official, youngest kid. We're the first race to go off. This guy walks up in an all white outfit and he's got a gun in his hand. And I'm thinking, oh, what have I done? And so off went the race. I belly flopped in off the block because nobody ever taught me how to jump off a block.
Get as quick as you can.
I put my little head down and I swam and swam. I swam a little hard out and I got to the other end. I touched the wall. I turned around and I had won.
Oh my goodness.
I had won the first race that I ever entered in my life. And awesome. That was the catalyst, really.
I am forever going to be doing this.
Yep. So I swam all through grade school, all through high school. I was the team captain on our high school team. I got a scholarship into college. It just kept expanding. And then once you're done with college, it's kind of like, oh, what's there to do now? Master's groups and that's when I started doing triathlons.
Okay. So it was a natural segue for you having mastered the swim portion, which I am not a triathlete, but I've known and had the privilege to talk to some who've competed at a very high level. The swim piece of it is the most difficult if you don't have the proper technique. So you can really make a big difference. In times of performance.
Yep.
You have that. Is that right?
Yes. People are very fearful of the swim. They just want to get through it. Right. And I walk up to the front of the line and I just
bring it on. I love just talking.
And then I go downhill from there. Let's be clear.
Well, and so why triathlons? What drew you to triathlons?
I finished my first year of college and I had gotten a scholarship to a place in Pennsylvania. And I finished my first year. It wasn't the right school. It wasn't the right coach. It wasn't the right career. And so I stopped swimming. I left that college and I took a year off and I stopped swimming completely. And then I met my husband about 7 years later. I had stopped for a long time. And he and I dated for a very, very brief time. He moved to Singapore. And I was going over to visit him, and he said, "You were a swimmer in college, weren't you?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Do you want to do a triathlon?" He said, "I'll do the bike. I'll find a runner, and you can do the swim in the ocean, in the warm water in Singapore." I'm like, okay. And then we ended up getting married, and I moved there, and we started doing triathlons just as a team initially.
Fun is a thing to do together.
Yeah. And we were a team, and then we were like, well, this is stupid. Why don't we just do these on our own? Because we're good at them.
Right, sure.
So, with the triathlon, you start with these little baby mini triathlons, and then you
right, where it's over in like 30 minutes or
right, and then you just progress, right? So you go to a longer distance, and then you do an Olympic distance, and then you do a half Ironman, and then you do a full Ironman, and it's addictive.
Yeah, I was going to say, you made it sound like as soon as you start, then you naturally go to an Ironman, and I'm not sure that's the case. So, obviously, one of the things that I've learned about you that is unique, at least in my estimation, is you have competed in an Ironman twice. And so explain for a moment what an Ironman is so that anyone listening knows exactly what that means.
It's all in one day because that's the first question people ask. It's an event that starts in the morning and finishes when you finish. And it's a 2.4-mile swim. It's a 112-mile road bike ride, followed by a full marathon, which is 26.2, you never forget that 2.2 miles. So it's consecutive and you go just from one sport right to the next. The pros, they finish it in 7.5, 8 hours. They do have a cutoff time of, I think it's 18 hours.
Okay, so roughly double-ish.
Yeah.
What the pros do. I don't know what the average person thinks of this, but it seems to me that any one of those would be enough just to wipe me out. So doing 3 back-to-back, I can imagine that requires a tremendous amount of training.
It does.
Fair?
It does. It's a stress on your relationships for sure.
I hadn't thought of it like that, but yeah, I suppose it's good.
You pretty much train, eat, and sleep and work. I mean, I was still working full time, while I was training. So you've got to plan really meticulously. This weekend, I have to do a 20-mile run.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a lot. And you just have to figure out what your body can handle. Because you're going to have setbacks, just like in dentistry, right? You're going to have setbacks.
So what would be a typical setback that you would have in the training process for an Ironman?
Injury, overtraining, and injury. When you get an injury, you have to assess, first of all, why did it happen? Was it overtraining? Were you incorrect technique? What was it that caused that setback? And then you have to rehab. You have to do your physical therapy. You have to rehab the injury to the point where you can move forward again in your training cycle. You lose time, which is very unnerving because you're on this set schedule moving forward towards the race day, But
how do you recover from that? Because I would expect that it's fairly regimented, right? That, your training is laid out for you
right,
on a day-to-day basis. And if you have to take a couple of weeks to rehab,
right,
how do you reconcile mentally with that as well as just the physical part of catching up?
For me, because I was such a good swimmer, I didn't have to swim as much as other people did.
Oh.
And so when I got injured, my injuries were usually in my legs. When I got injured, I would transition into swimming. So I was still getting an aerobic workout and I was still training, but I wasn't using the muscle that had been deteriorated or injured. So mentally, it does set you back. I was also at that point traveling a lot, like 4 or 5 times a month. And so your schedule has to work around that as well. And that I think was more mentally tough for me because I couldn't swim or I couldn't ride my bike. When I was traveling, I could only run.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Which that I needed anyway, because I'm a very poor runner.
So that was your Achilles heel.
Oh, yeah.
Was you running?
Yeah. That's fun.
Well, so when was your first triathlon or your first Ironman? You've done 2.
The first one was in 2005. It was in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And I figured when I finished, I set a goal for myself. My first goal was really just finish because so many people don't.
Sure, yeah.
And my second goal, I gave myself a time calculating in, my cramping or my eating went wrong or whatever. And I calculated a time that I was hopeful to do. And when I crossed the finish line, I wanted to do it in 14 hours. And when I crossed the finish line, it was 14.0003.
No, you're kidding me.
I could not have planned that better.
Okay. And did you have any idea you were that close to your goal time?
I knew I was on track for it. Yeah, but I didn't know I'd be like that exact.
Wow. I don't think I've ever heard that precise of a goal being hit on a Ironman like that. So that was number one. So was that a positive experience coming out of that? Did you lead that event feeling like, okay, hit my 2 goals? And at that time, did you know you wanted to do another one, or was it too soon?
Too soon, because that's immediately what people ask you. So are you going to do another one? And you're so sorry you can't walk down a curb. It's the whole town is walking like zombies.
Oh, that, yeah. Day before versus day after, big difference.
But I met my goals and I was really happy with that. The conditions were absolutely perfect. The water was the right temperature. It was calm. There wasn't a lot of wind on the bike. It was just perfect conditions. To finish the first one on, it was a great high.
Oh, that's awesome. And how soon was your second one after that?
2009. So 4 years later, because I had moved into a new age group, I wanted to wait till I was in, a little bit older. I was the younger in the older category. Not that I'm competitive or anything, but.
No, not at all. And I think the goal shifted, it sounds like.
Yeah.
From just finishing and your own personal goal to now saying, I wonder if I can actually place in this, or
oh no, that was never. It was more, the second goal was even, I want to finish and I want to do better than I did in the first one.
Okay. So it really was against yourself still. And how did that go?
Completely different conditions. It was the same place. I did it on purpose. That I selected Coeur d'Alene, Idaho again, because I knew the course, I knew the water, I was familiar with it. So I thought that's a good way to do a comparison, but completely different conditions. The water had white caps on it in the morning. And there was a really high wind coming in because there was a rainstorm coming in, and it was just a brutal day. Everybody was off course in the swim, and my time in my swim was 15 minutes slower than my original time.
Wow, that's a big difference.
And everybody's were, off the charts because it was just white caps. I finished it, and I was still very close to the same time. And so in my mind, I did way better because it was much harder conditions.
Yeah, I would agree 100%.
And so I was very happy with finishing the way that I did because I was still at that 14-hour, I think it was 14:13.
That's remarkable, really.
I was pretty happy with it. Because I came out of the water in the first lap, because it was a double lap of the swim, came out of the water and I looked at my watch and I was like, I'm not going to ever make the time I made the last Ironman.
So there, the expectations just lowered a little bit. It's like, okay, throw that out. I'm going to just now stay smooth and within myself, etc.
Exactly. And that is a mental shift for sure. Right along your alley, right? You're already behind right from the beginning. And so that was a tough shift.
Yeah. And it's the balance between being outcome focused and process focused. When you're competitive, a lot of times you get anchored to the outcomes, meaning the times and places and things like that. And some people lose track of the process and then they get off course because they start focusing on external things that aren't helping them continue to deal with the conditions, adjust their technique or things like that, right?
Right.
So it sounds like you were able to do that fairly quickly into the swim. We were like, this is a different ballgame.
Yeah. And so, and then the high winds came in and the run, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. And so we were freezing. People were getting pulled off the course with hypothermia. Big difference.
Oh my God.
I was running in the sun, the first one.
Yeah, it's like, this feels good. Yeah. So
it was a much more mental race.
So what did you take from that?
Sports have always given me direction because I like laying out the plan and I'm very execution driven. Okay. And so when I get a plan, I'm like a dog with a bone. I just stick to it. I do it because I know it's going to get me to where I want to be. And so those lessons, honestly, I carried those through school And through being on the swim team, going into dental hygiene, and I was also worked in corporate for 20 years. I was the hygienist part-time, and then I was a corporate employee as an educator.
Oh, okay.
And those skills translated beautifully into corporate world as well.
How did you get connected into dental hygiene? So you have a robust experience with swimming and triathlons, et cetera. Where did dental hygiene fit into the equation for you?
It's not a real exciting story. Initially, I was in special education in the college that I'd gotten a swim scholarship to. And I did a year and nothing was the right fit.
This is not where I need to be.
Right. So I took a year off. I moved home. I worked. And I ran into a high school friend of mine that was in her second year of dental hygiene. And she was like, why don't you go to hygiene school? She said, I love it. And I always loved the health careers. And I thought, okay. So I applied and I got in and it was a great career choice. But there's nothing exciting about the way that I got there.
I always find it's interesting the somewhat circuitous route people often take into their career, in this case, dentistry. And for you, you happened across a friend who was in it. And had you ever thought about it before your friend mentioned it?
I thought about nursing because my sister was in nursing.
Okay.
And so I was leaning into the healthcare.
Healthcare was in your consciousness.
Definitely. And my first career was in special education.
Caring for others, et cetera.
Exactly.
In your DNA.
And I couldn't be a nurse because my sister was. There was no way.
Huh. That's the redhead getting...
The competitive redhead. Yeah. No way.
Oh, that's classy. That's awesome. I love that. And so dental hygiene, you really immersed yourself in that, it sounds like. And tell me a little bit about the role you had that was the part-time hygienist, part-time corporate educator. Where did that come from?
My clinical career was always in implantology, the prosthetic side, and perio. So those were my two things, right? And I moved to Washington State. My husband and I had lived in Singapore for 6 years. And I moved to Washington State and had to take my boards over again because I'd been out of practice too long. I was educated on the East Coast, so it wasn't transferable anyway. So I had to do my boards again. I'd been out of school since 1985. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? What if I fail these?
And it had inside of you kicked in, I'm sure, right?
Oh, totally did. And I had to do anesthetic and restorative because that's part of the licensing in Washington State.
In Washington, you're right, yeah.
I was excited about that because I love to learn and continue to apply stuff like that. So I was studying for my boards and I was working part-time looking for jobs through temporary agencies, right? I was doing reception work. I was doing office manager work, couldn't practice. I was doing a little bit of assisting. And I happened to go into Optiva, which is now Sonicare, Philips Sonicare.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And that's where they were started, right? I went in there. They were looking for somebody to record the stats of the research that the hygienists were doing. And so I just went in and was plugging in numbers all day as an assistant for them. And then they find out I was a hygienist and they were looking for a speaker to start their educational program.
So that's how it all started at one time.
Yeah. So it fell into my lap and I thought, oh yeah, I've been a speaker for Novo BioCare. Yeah, I can do that. And I thought I'll do this for a few years and I'll get my license and see where I land. And 20 years later.
You were with that company for 20 years?
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I parallel dental hygiene clinical and an educator for Philips.
Now it makes sense to me because I wasn't sure where your speaking connected into the equation because you obviously are a very experienced and accomplished speaker with the CSP.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Association. And I want you to know that's very impressive.
Oh, thank you.
When I see that, I know that, okay, there's a story there because that doesn't happen overnight. Even over a decade, usually. So it happens over a longer stretch. So that's when you're speaking. It kind of was happening here and there, it sounds like. But is that when you really devoted yourself to that as well?
No, my speaking actually started my very first hygiene job in Washington, D.C., because I was working for an implantology practice, and they had brought the technique in from Sweden. It was the Center for Osseointegration, and nobody was doing implants. This was in the 80s.
Okay.
And the dentist, he and his partner were lecturing all over the world, teaching people about dental implants. They'd learned it from Denmark and brought it into the country. And he came back to the office after a trip one week and He said, I need an office manager and a hygienist and an assistant to go with me and lecture on the part of your role in the practice. Does anybody want to do that? And I was like, let me think about it. Yes. And so he was working for Nobel Biocare at the time. It was Nobel Pharma back then. And they hired me as a consultant to teach the implant dental hygiene aspect.
This sounds like an awesome opportunity for you.
Oh my gosh. I couldn't have made that up.
Yeah, exactly. That's right place, right time. I mean, you make your own luck. So you put yourself in a position for that opportunity to come along.
And I said yes. I have always said yes.
Look, I'll try it. And let's see how it goes. And it's funny that you say that, because that just reminds me, I like to listen to all kinds of different podcasts and people with different perspectives. And I was listening to a little clip of, I believe, a CIA operative, and they have a master class that they teach. What can the general public learn from what we've learned in our roles in the government? And one of the main takeaways was, in general, people need to be more bold. They need to be more bold in their decision making. And I have kind of been tossing that around, like, I can see how that would be the case, because a lot of people never really achieve what they're capable of because of fear, because of what they think other people will think, all these kinds of barriers. But it sounds like you've always had the philosophy of yes.
I've never been afraid of anything to say yes to, which is interesting. If you've ever done any of the, like I've done the Strength Finders, Clifton, and one of my qualities, one of my top 5 qualities, say that 3 times, is that I make very quick decisions, but I look at the whole picture first and I make very quick, deliberate decisions. It's a good quality, but it's also not so great quality because I get frustrated with people who can't make decisions quickly.
I would say probably there are more people who are on that side of the fence than on either side of the fence. But that's also why people with that composition, your composition, are probably more leading companies on the cutting edge of things. The rest of the population tends to be the followers and like, I'll wait and see. You know, let's see how Lisa does with that. And then I might commit to it.
Right. But if you know that is one of your strengths, but also one of your weaknesses or your challenges, it's really good that you know that, because then you know how to approach people as a leader, right? You take what you learn.
Precisely. And when we talk about the transfer from everything you've learned in sports and in your career as a hygienist, as well as a speaker, et cetera, it sounds like that could be one of those things that you've carried forward through everything you've done. That also reminds me, early on in my career, I was in a startup in the Boston metropolitan area where we catered to corporate executives on helping them train to be able to withstand stress better.
Oh, yeah.
And the investor in our company had just sold his company for, I don't even know how many millions of dollars, and was a very accomplished CEO.
Yeah.
I would guess, and I think this was probably prior to Strength Finders being around, but we didn't apply it to him. But I would guess that he probably had those same qualities.
Yeah.
Remember him saying, we had a conversation about our startup and what I think needed to happen next and kind of laying out a plan. And he got quiet and he leaned in and said, don't wait. And he was referring to my hesitancy to move too quickly in changing strategy or implementing on growth. Yeah. And he simply said, don't wait. And then he followed that up with explaining, say, look, you wouldn't be here if you didn't know what you were doing. So whatever you decide to do, I'm assuming is going to be 80% right.
Okay.
The 20% that might be wrong, you'll figure out as you go and get data. Don't wait.
That's good advice.
I've never forgotten it.
Yep.
And I think that a lot of times that's what happens to us in kind of our careers. And even if I make the transition into dentistry, and the idea of presenting a treatment plan or of making a recommendation or of deciding to elevate your skills. Too often, I find that people get paralyzed.
What is that phrase? Analysis paralysis?
That's it, yeah. And the genesis of that is because the fear of the outcome, of fear of being wrong, fear of failing, all those types of things, which I don't want to say you never had that, but even if you did, you were able to overcome it. Is that a fair assumption for you?
Yeah, I never looked at things as failing. I looked at it as a learning, like, okay, that didn't work out so well for me. What can I do differently to make the outcome better?
Tell me where you adopted that or learned that.
That was my dad, definitely. My father was a very analytical, very engineer-brained.
Okay, so the emotions weren't there so much. It was more analytical. What was wrong? Fix it.
He was Pennsylvania Dutch and German. So
That pretty much said it all right there. Yep.
when things didn't go right, if I lost a swimming race, he would never say, "You didn't do so great there, did you, sweetheart?" He'd say, "What do you think happened? Did you eat the right foods? Did you get enough sleep?
Yep.
Did you get off the block fast enough? What do you think happened in that race? What should you do differently next time?" And so he would make me think, yeah, I lost the race, but I know next time that I can at least get a better time, maybe not win, but I could at least get a better time by correcting the things that I analyzed that I didn't do as great as I should have, right? So it definitely came from my dad.
What a gift that was that he gave you at an early age.
Yeah.
And then you applied that obviously to your Ironman, your swimming in competitions, and then to your career in dental hygiene. So you've had this dual focus on dental hygiene, speaking, and obviously always been an athletically inclined too.
Yeah. That's my balance. It's always been my outlet. I'm very regimented in my athletics. So my husband and I live in a mecca of sports world. We live in Park City, Utah. It's known for Olympians. Normal people here are Olympians. I called my friends in Seattle when I first moved here and I said, "Oh my gosh, you guys, I am the fat, slow, lazy girl." And that was crazy. And so my husband is very athletic as well. And we work out together. We work out Monday through Friday. We do 3 times a week. We do a cardio circuit training. And 2 times a week, we do Pilates. And then the weekends, of course, are just all athletics. That's just our lifestyle. So that's always been my balance. If I'm stressed, I will leave my desk and go swim, or I'll just go downstairs and stretch, or that's my outlet.
It's always something physical for you to disrupt the stress cycle.
And so it's very natural for me to keep balance like that. But I've also learned to say no. That's part of balance as well, because when you run your own business, you can't turn down opportunities.
When you run your own business.
Right.
There's no clock on you.
You need the business. But I've learned that I try not to take business that's not the right fit for me, or for both of us, actually. Like, I try to really connect with the client beforehand and say, "I don't think we're a good fit for each other, and here's the reasons why."
That isn't always easy to do.
No, it's not.
When you feel the pressure and income, it's not easy to say, this might not be a good fit.
But you have to look at it like, this client going to make me miserable doing things that I really am not the best at? It's not what I'm creative at. It's not the right fit for me from that perspective. And they've already made demands outside of the contract.
Okay, that's a little bit different. Yeah, that goes.
There's a lot of things that could really cause you a lot of stress. So I've gotten better at saying no.
They're teaching me how they're going to interact later, early on, right?
Right.
And then it's a matter of, I'm not going to be able to deliver my best result either.
Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
So you just have to ask better questions, I've learned.
And I'm sure you've gotten better at that as time has
gone. Oh my gosh, yeah.
You mentioned Park City and how it's like the mecca for Olympic athletes. That picture over my shoulder here, that's of Eric Schlope, who is a 3-time Olympic skier who lives in Park City, grew up in Park City.
Yeah, of course he did.
And of course, with a name like Schlope, he would be a skier.
Of course he is. Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
He married Summer Sanders, who was an Olympic swimmer, and they've settled outside of Park City, and their family has a real estate business. And
is she a real estate agent?
Marty Schlope, yeah.
Yeah. I recognize the name.
That's his mother. Yeah.
Okay.
You probably have come across them at some point. Fabulous family. Eric is one of the best human beings I've ever met. If you ever have a chance to meet him, let him know that we've come across.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He's one of my favorites. One of my favorite people in the world. So
that's a great story.
In any case, the transition of what you've learned in sports and triathlon, et cetera, transitioning that into lessons, what would you say are some of the core lessons that you've taken from that experience and applied to your world as a dental hygienist, let's say?
I think planning and preparation and execution. They're all relevant to success, and they all work in tandem, right, to achieve goals, whether you're doing an athletic event or whether you're setting your practice up for the next year. You have to plan what your goals are. You have to prepare to execute them, and then you have to execute them well in order to achieve the goals. They're all key to each other, and they all have to be present.
Were you in a traditional private practice at any point as a hygienist, or did you stay in the corporate?
I've always paralleled clinical practice with
okay, got it.
So both.
Okay. Where do you think in that sequence that you mentioned of the planning and preparation and execution, where do you find that we in dentistry tend to fall most often?
Planning, definitely. When you asked me that, I was envisioning the schedule and the way that they fill in emergencies and the way that we fill the holes, right? I've always used a template in dentistry, and I know a lot of people are really resistant to that, but a template gives you the plan that is non-negotiable, and it's the way that you're going to get the best production. People just have a hard time with it.
When I hear you say template, are you referring to something like block scheduling? Is that none of what you're referring to? Okay.
Yeah.
Along with you, I have seen there be a lot of resistance to that because the assumption, I think, is that it's restrictive.
What it comes down to is the way that it's communicated to the patient. Because somebody calls in and they say they have an emergency. If it's a true emergency, we have an availability at 10 a.m. and we have an availability at 2 p.m. Which one works best for you? Well, I can't come to either of those. Then it's not a true emergency.
That's true.
Right? And the people that are relaying that message have to feel confident in us in saying it that way. It all comes down to communication.
I know that you're an author as well. Tell me how the book came to be and what made you decide to write it.
So one of my first courses that I wrote, and I still give it, an updated version of it, was Iron Out Your Communications. And I took that course. It just made sense to me to take the acronym Ironman and apply it to, the Ironman communication skills or principles.
I love that. Loved it.
And so I took the acronym and I made it into things that people could use to enhance their engagement with their team, to enhance their relationships with their patients. And it's all communication based for more engagement. And so I took the Ironman word and just used the acronym, but there's stories woven into it of me competing and lessons learned, like we're talking about, that are woven into the stories of working with patients and communicating with patients.
If you wouldn't mind, pick one, because I'm really interested in the story aspect and applying it to the Ironman acronym that you outline in the book. What is one of those that you feel like is something that is really helpful for people to hear that's going to really drive this point home around this acronym?
In dentistry or in
dentistry, yeah.
In dentistry. Okay, so I would say in the Ironman acronym, first impressions and last impressions. So the I, the very first I, stands for impressions.
Yep.
And making a good first impression. And that can happen in so many different ways. It could be on the phone. It could be the parking lot. It can be when the person walks into the office reception area. It could be when they walk into an operatory, or the way that you're handed off from the clinical hygienist to the assistant for the second part of their appointment or procedure if they have two that day, right? And so those impressions are so important for people to start to build the trust and loyalty as soon as they meet you. And so that we really focus on first impressions and the last impressions. Like in a speaker's world, you probably know this, David, your first impression is your second most important aspect of your speech. Okay. And so you go out on stage and you want it to be really good, but the very last impression that you leave is what people are going to remember.
What I've heard and read is recency and latency. Recency being the most recent thing that you saw and heard, which is the last thing you say. And then the first thing, sometimes things in the middle get lost. But if you walk out on stage and make a big impression right then, and then end strong, to your point, the bookend of the impression, that's exactly one of those things that is particularly important, I think, in dentistry.
Yep. If you leave the patient, let's say, we'll talk about last impression as well. If you walk out and you put the chart on the admin desk and you just, say a very informal goodbye and walk away, that's very different than walking out and saying, Carol, this is our receptionist, Nancy. She's going to schedule your next appointments. I have it all in the computer. She can also explain the costs and the insurance and answer any questions that you have. And I have you scheduled to see you in 6 months. So I'll be looking forward to it. And then you walk away. How's that going to make the patient feel different?
Absolutely. And giving the patient an opportunity to agree or ask questions or something like that. So it's a triad, right? And on that note, I often remind clients that from a team member standpoint, you don't really need to say anything. If you have a route slip or something like that, or you update the computer before you walk them out, you all know enough of what's going on that you wouldn't have to communicate. So the verbal communication is for the patient.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Not for the team member.
Nope.
Because they can look at the computer, or you could hand them a route slip and they know exactly what to do. So the trust transfer or the handoff, whatever you want to call it, is really for the patient to hear everything coming from you to your receptionist.
So agree, 100%. That is for the patient.
And so then as you have progressed in your career and the coaching you do now, what are you really devoting your coaching efforts to today?
So my coaching is for coaching people to develop a presentation, to get the structure and to have the emotional connection with the audience. So that's one part of it. And the other part is for the execution, right? How do you deliver an impactful presentation that people are going to take action?
Okay. And so your focus today in your coaching is on the coaching of speakers.
Not necessarily just speakers. You've got managers in corporate positions. You've got faculty that are speaking all day. Like, it's anybody that wants to improve their engagement of who they're speaking to, right? Because being in corporate, I've been in a lot of manager meetings where they don't really follow an agenda. They don't really have things planned out. They haven't really organized their thoughts, and nobody's engaged. And then nobody follows up. And then they get upset because nobody's followed through with the call to action. Right. And so structuring their lectures differently or structuring their team meetings differently. People don't think they're public speakers, but most people are, right?
Great point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. But when you frame it in the context of even a professor,
right?
Maybe even most importantly, a professor.
Right. And that's quite a bit of my clients are faculty at dental hygiene schools.
Oh, I love that. And you know what? It's so needed.
Yeah.
It's like a dentist who teaches them how to manage people and run a business.
Oh, well, they're getting a little more now.
A little more now, but still. And likewise, who teaches faculty members how to actually communicate in a way that's meaningful and impactful and understandable. And now you're providing that. I think that's incredible.
And the other part of that is I work with a lot of sales and marketing teams in corporations to enhance their product presentations. So when they go to a meeting, that sometimes have a rep stand up there and just rattle off the details of the product and nobody's paying attention. So how do you get their attention? Create or structure a presentation that's engaging for that particular audience. And that's going to drive more people to your booth, which enhances your sales.
Yeah.
So it's not just for speakers, for sure.
That's a very important, I think, clarification. And when you broaden the focus of it to really anybody who needs to communicate a message, then there aren't too many people who couldn't benefit from the work.
Exactly.
As we wrap up our conversation, are there any final thoughts you have around takeaways for the people in the dental community that can really learn from what you have experienced through your Ironman experience, as well as hygiene, et cetera?
I think just improving our communications between all of the departments and each other. You've got to understand and respect everyone on your team in order to really, really know them, right? We've got to get to know people on a different level than just the work environment. And people are very emotionally connected to what they want to achieve from being a member of that team. And so we have to get to know each other better and really respect, and from a generational perspective as well. That's a huge part of what I talk about.
So let's talk about that for a moment.
Okay.
I agree 100% with what you're proposing. What do you find are the best ways to do that when you have multiple generations in a dental practice, often in the hygiene department, but it could be assisting, could be doctor level, but
right.
I find it's very typical to be in the hygiene department. What do you find are the best ways for people, multiple generations, to really get to know each other to the degree that you're referring?
So I teach a course called Generational Wellness, focusing on, first and foremost, who you are as a generation. Because I'm a Gen X, and maybe you're working with a baby boomer who's the leader of the practice right now. I'm a Gen X, and you've got Gen Y and Gen Z who have completely different perspectives of how communication should even occur. A baby boomer wants to talk to you on the phone. A Gen X wants a text. A Gen Y wants a text. A Gen Z depends. They sometimes like the personal touch, but the way that the leader interacts with them has to be very different. A baby boomer, here's your job description, go do it. Don't ask questions, go do it.
It's very dictatorial.
And then a Gen X, they just want to know what the project is and leave me be. If I have questions, I'll come back to you. Because Gen Xers are very independent because we were the latchkey kids. Both parents worked.
Great point.
Gen Y wants everything explained to them in detail. They do not want to make mistakes. So they require a lot more coaching. It's not hand-holding, it's coaching. It's really helping them to learn the skills that they need in order to complete a project.
Because they want to do well.
You've got to figure out who you are first and how you're perceived, and then learn about the other generations so that you can interact correctly and know how to approach them. A great example is a company or a practice that I coached in Oregon. This one woman was having a really hard time working on a project, and they were of 2 different ages. And she was just about to send an email again to the woman asking for more information because they needed it for the project. She wasn't getting any response from her. And I had gone through this generational Jeopardy game that we play, and she had put it near her desk. And she said, I looked at the chart and it dawned on me, she's a baby boomer. I'm a Gen X. She wants me to have a personal conversation with her. And so she went into her office. They talked about her grandkids and her weekend and her grandbabies and everything that was important to her. And the doors of information opened, right? Because she communicated in the way that the other person expected her to and not in her own way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It makes total sense that often we try to communicate in the way that works for us, not the way for the recipient.
I don't want to talk on the phone. Text me, I will respond in a second. But if I have to call somebody, I'm like, oh, God. Okay, I can do this.
That's classic.
Because in my mind, I'm thinking this could have been over with in a text.
So inefficient. So inefficient.
That's the thing. It's efficiency. In my mind, it's efficiency and effectiveness, right?
Yeah.
And I know everybody's not like that. So I have to take a step back and say, this is not a person to be texting with. All right? You have to realize that. So you need to learn.
A lot of misunderstandings can occur.
Oh, yeah.
That really aren't intended. And one of the things I often tell people is do not try to communicate an emotional topic through text or email.
Absolutely.
That's a face-to-face.
Yep.
Or certainly live, at least. But
that's very difficult for the younger generations.
Completely.
And so that's where coaching comes in. You know, you have reverse mentorship in your practices, and you have a person that's very skilled in socialization and a person who's very skilled in technology. You partner those two together as mentors for each other, right? And they've learned from each other.
That would be a great suggestion for practices that have those multiple generations that may not really be seeing eye to eye, and neither one is stepping toward the other, but then having a project that they work on together, and then they have to play off of each other's strengths.
Yeah, that works really well when people have discrepancies like that.
To bridge that gap. So as our final step in our dialogue is what I call the 2-minute drill.
Okay.
And yes, it's a football term because in football, there's the 2-minute drill, but I'm just going to ask a series of questions. It's really not meant to be anything other than fun. There's no right or wrong answer. It's a way to end our conversation on a fun note.
I like it.
Okay.
I like it.
I know. That's your style. All right. So here we go.
Okay, I'm ready.
What's your favorite healthy snack?
Oh, this is my new favorite. I love a slice of cucumber with traditional hummus and a shrimp.
Oh my gosh. I'm going to have to try that tomorrow.
That is my everyday snack at 11 o'clock.
Oh, I love it. Do you have a favorite sports movie?
Oh, what's that one with the sideline? Is it Sandra Bullock?
Blindside.
Blindside.
You are the second person of 3 that has said that.
Oh, funny.
In these episodes. The Blindside's definitely a hit. What's your favorite sports memory?
Winning my first race.
Wow, that goes all the way back to when you were, what? 6 years old. What's the most challenging part of balancing dentistry and your sports experience?
Let's see. I don't feel like I'm challenged with that balance. I think you have to find what helps you keep that balance, but I don't feel challenged in balancing my work life and my personal life. It doesn't really exist for me.
Okay, so those priorities have been in place as just part of who you are for so long.
I think so.
It's like breathing, it sounds like.
Uh-huh.
That's awesome. If you could have dinner with any athlete, who would it be?
Oh my goodness. I think I would love to have dinner with my father, but when he was in high school. He was a really fast runner.
Uh-huh.
And I would love to hear about his life and his athletics at that point.
That's fascinating. You said he's a really fast runner, but was he also a swimmer or was that your husband?
My dad was a runner.
Okay. Awesome.
I didn't inherit that.
Your dad has such an impact on you with his analytical thinking of how to break things down too. Then the final question is, what sport do you think is most similar to dentistry?
Whoa. I'm going to say chess.
Oh, okay. Tell me why.
Because it's strategic. You really have to think forward and make decisions, but you also have to reflect back on your movements to know the next move. It's a very strategic type of business, and you have to plan it in order to execute it.
Fantastic. And I had never thought of chess in that way, but I think you're right. It is very strategic. Obviously, chess is very strategic, and dentistry is too, really. When you try to excel at it, when you really look at it, what you have to do to excel, it becomes, how do I move all the pieces and even my team? How do I get them to excel?
And I'm not even a chess player, but it makes sense. I'm not.
Well, this has been a tremendous amount of fun for me, Lisa, spending some time talking about your history and what you're doing now. I think there's a lot people will be able to take away from this episode.
Oh, I hope so.
And I'm just very grateful. So thank you so much.
It was so fun chatting with you. And I really love the way we dove into some of the topics.
You have a great rest of your day. And this concludes this episode of Athletes in Dentistry. I hope you're able to take some nuggets away from Lisa's experience and apply it in your practice.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, Lisa.